Cambridge Film Show.
Cambridge Radio.
Hello there, and welcome to another edition of the Cambridge Film Show, your fortnightly foray into the world of film and everything vaguely celluloid adjacent. We're broadcasting right here on Cambridge Radio across the city in South Cambridgeshire. We have opinions and we're never afraid to share them. The sun is finally shining, which means we've hit that slightly awkward part of the film calendar where the summer blockbusters aren't quite here and the big prestige films have already strutted off with their awards. But don't worry, we have sat in dark rooms and watched this week's releases so you can make the informed choice. You can either follow our recommendations to a lovely air-conditioned cinema or your own sofa, or ignore us completely and sit in the sun, as long as you listen to this next hour. I am Emma, Dangerous Marchant, and because everything is better with a partner in crime, I'm co-hosting with the effortlessly smooth criminal, Yossi Osman.
Woo! Hello!
On our A-team list of reviewers this week, Luke PYT Irwin.
Hello.
Lorcan O'Neill, our very own man in the mirror.
Good afternoon.
And we wanted him back, and so he came in the kitchen.
Hello.
As you might have guessed from my terrible hints there, because I am no Luke, who effortlessly weaves these into his intro, we will be looking at the long-awaited Michael Jackson biopic from Antoine Fuqua, imaginatively called Michael. Elsewhere in cinemas, there are gross-out scares with Lee Cronin's The Mummy, the ubiquitous Junior Edition National Treasure, Josh O'Connor in a quietly political Western Rebuilding, and Japanese body/folk horror Exit 8. Turning to streamers, we're going to look at Jonah Hill's directorial debut, Hollywood satire Outcome. Sorry, not debut. Sophomore effort after mid-90s, Outcome. Netflix young adult comedy from the Happy Madison stable, Roommates, and Peter Farrelly's latest gross-out comedy, the football-themed Balls Up. So, as promised, let's turn to the king of pop himself and check out the trailer for Michael.
You're confident. You're strong. You're beautiful. You're the greatest of all time.
Let me tell you something. In this life, you're either a winner or you're a loser. Y'all want to work in a steel mill like me for the rest of your days?
No, sir.
Yeah, because I sure as hell don't. Y'all willing to fight for it?
Yes, sir.
I need to hear you a little louder. Y'all willing to fight for it?
Yes, sir.
Ready whenever you are, Michael.
Antoine Fuqua, best known for Training Day and The Equalizer franchise, was perhaps a surprise choice to helm the first biopic about the definitive pop star Michael Jackson. It has finally hit the screens after multiple reshoots allegedly demanded by the Jackson family, who did fund this, as far as I know, so by their estate to remove any mention of the allegations of abuse which have surrounded the reclusive Jackson both before and after death. It stars Jaafar Jackson, Jermaine's son, so Michael's nephew, as the king of pop, and charts the rise of the Jackson family and then Michael under the sort of firm guidance, for want of a better word, of patriarch Joe Jackson, played by Coleman Domingo. So I'm going to come to you, Lorcan, and I couldn't help myself. Is this biopic, coming after, let's say, Bohemian Rhapsody, Rocket Man, A Complete Unknown, even to a certain extent, Song Sung Blue, is this thriller or is it filler?
Oh, kind of a bit of both, I suppose. I think the word alleged kind of haunts this film in quite a few ways. I think Antoine Fuqua was probably the dumbest guy in Hollywood for agreeing to do this, because how on earth do you even tackle something like this? Someone who had the legacy and troubled life of Michael. And there's been alleged reshoots and lawsuits and people saying you can't include this person, you can't include this person. Allegedly it started off as facing, the darker history of Michael Jackson and lots of reshoots, and it's been whittled down from a 4-hour film to just over 2 hours. And so I was really curious as to this had everything, all the makings of a complete classic train wreck. But I have to give props to Antoine Fuqua. He actually pulled it out of the bag. Considering the trouble production this film has had, it feels remarkably like one cohesive film that had a start point, middle point, end point. His kind of personality is in it. It's not a lifeless biopic. It's not a Wikipedia biopic. It does take kind of weird risks, and they do go into Joe Jackson's troubled history with Michael. But for me, I think what really carried the film was Jaafar Jackson's performance. He nails The prosthetics do a good job of bringing you into that time. I think he does the voice quite well, although it does take a moment or two to adjust to that. I think his dancing really did make me want to wish I had seen Michael Jackson live. So I think perfectly palatable, not quite as safe as we've been led to believe, but still does shy away from a lot of the darker elements, which, considering it's the family kind of behind this, I think that's fair enough.
Okay, Yossi, you went into this. I think you went to go and see it last night for a date night with your fiancé, and you did. I mean, because obviously, there's the whole. I would say with Michael Jackson, as with other, troubled historical figures, let's say, when there's things that come out, you have to try and remove the person from the art, right, to a certain extent. Yeah. And I think we've all been doing that probably the last 12 years from with Michael Jackson, because no one can deny what an incredible force. And you did go in there saying both you and Joe are massive fans of Michael Jackson's music.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
So from that point, because I would say I didn't think I was such a fan. He was ubiquitous growing up, but actually going in, I remembered I was like, oh my goodness, yeah, this guy did it all.
Yeah.
So, do you agree with Lorcan? Do you think this has been sanitised within, to make it almost unpalatable, or do you think it still is a good night out of the cinema?
I think it really depends on what your expectations are. I mean, let's be real, critics have absolutely panned this, but I think what they are trying to get at is they wanted a deep character study of the man that was Michael Jackson, and actually that's not what this became. So if that's what you're expecting, this isn't going to be the film for you. But actually, if you go and watch this and you are a fan of the music, a fan of him as a dancer, as a singer, you are going to be treated, because there is a lot of that. And I agree completely with Lorcan in that Jaafar Jackson is absolutely brilliant. I mean, I know there's a lot of voiceover from the real MJ, especially with the singing. I think that's all his voice. But actually, you couldn't tell, because Jaafar Jackson pulls it off so well. You believe that it is him. And I mean, the mannerisms, the movements are fantastic. So from that perspective, it's great. Where for me, I was a little bit like, the pacing is quite off. I think the first half, where you've got the brilliant Giuliano Valdi as young Michael,
amazing,
who's sensational, and you kind of get a bit of the history of what Joe Jackson was like as a father, and how Michael essentially did not have a childhood. And
but then I was going to. I guess that's part of it being cut down from 4 hours to 2 hours, and I understand that again the family have sort of come out to try and sanitise that depiction of Joe Jackson.
It's very sanitised. I mean, Joe Jackson not so much, but it is a very sanitised story, and it conveniently ends right before things get a bit murkier. It actually ends with the 1988 Bad tour, so it's not going to cover all of that. It might in the future, but at the minute it's not. But you could tell it was stripped down, because especially in the second half, the pacing is kind of off, and what it actually becomes is going from song to song to song without much narrative substance between, and that was quite noticeable for me.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I thought the end, when they sort of skip to the end of, they have the last Jackson concert in 1984, then it skips forward to 1988. I felt there was at least one full song too many, which is almost to showcase Jaafar Jackson's incredible performance.
Which he is brilliant.
And I wholeheartedly agree, because it can't be easy to be a nephew and then to with such an icon and such a well-known figure as Michael Jackson. I think probably that was the best choice to go, to keep it within the family. Maybe it was the best choice. But yeah, I'm with you. I think there could have been layers of pathos, even taking the alleged abuse allegations out of it, or grooming allegations out of it. I think there's levels of pathos in Michael Jackson, because he was such an odd and interesting and just bizarre character, and I think we lose some of that. You lose a lot of that, but that, I mean, we all know why. So that feels like our review was also similar to that.
I mean, a lot of the pathos comes from him. It doesn't shy away from the fact that he was quite strange, and it really leans into that missing childhood element. Like, there's probably what felt like a 10-minute sequence of him meeting Bubbles, which is probably the most atrocious CGI I've seen in modern
bad.
I don't know why they couldn't just, get a monkey. But
when he plays Twister, when he wants to play Twister with his brothers, and they're like, "No, Michael, we're not kids anymore." And so then he's frolicking with Bubbles.
It seems like they got an actor to emote as Bubbles as well, which is just bizarre. But I suppose it is a bizarre scenario, so fair play. I think there's been kind of a meme going around about the end of this film is going to end like the Avengers, where like Michael Jackson will return.
Yeah. His story will continue.
But his story actually will continue. So I'm hard, because they said this is it. They have enough. They said they had about 30 minutes of footage that they could use for something else, but they haven't let into the fact that this is a part one. But the film ends with we will tackle the rest of the
But
story.
this is absolutely the peak of his career. I feel like from sort of maybe I'm not, but I feel that in the 90s was when things did start to swirl around him, and he did get odder, more reclusive. Things were much more difficult. He obviously had his children, so I do think that maybe if they want to end on a high, you would end there. But if you want to if you want to strip down the man a little bit more, then yeah, give us more.
And I think it's quite telling that you said you didn't really think much, and then when you went in, you were like, oh yes, he was an absolute star. He had fantastic songs.
First black artist on MTV, right? Biggest selling. He was an absolute trailblazer. And as you said, and I can't say enough, Giuliano Valdi playing young Michael Jackson in that studio, and then when Berry Gordy is trying to get him to keep his feet still, and he just can't, was one of the most joyous moments I've had in a couple of months at the cinema.
I haven't seen it, but it sounds a bit like One Love when they did the Bob Marley thing, and the estate was very involved with that. And in the end, they glossed over some of the more controversial elements of his life, but they celebrated the music. Did this celebrate the music, do you think?
I think very much
almost
so. I think
much,
it's
maybe.
kind of the opposite of Bohemian Rhapsody, where I thought Bohemian Rhapsody, they absolutely really went heavy on how much they potentially did not like Freddie Mercury. Whereas this is very much kind of justifying a lot of Michael.
Very true. Right, we could clearly talk about this for a long time, but we do need to move on. Michael is a certificate 12A. It opened yesterday, and it's showing in all the Cambridge cinemas.
Over to me. So next up, we are talking Lee Cronin's The Mummy.
She's alive.
It's very important you fully prepare yourselves for what you're about to see. No sudden moves. No loud noises.
Hey, Butterfly. It's Mom and Dad.
Yeah, we are here. We're here.
Lee Cronin's The Mummy is written and directed by filmmaker Lee Cronin, the man behind Evil Dead Rise, and produced by horror royalty James Wan and Jason Blum. Jack Rayner and Laia Costa play the parents of a young girl who disappears without trace in the Egyptian desert. 8 years later, she turns up on the doorstep, but something is very, very wrong. Think less Brendan Fraser, more something like The Exorcist. Luke, I'm going to come to you first. So Cronin actually turned down a sequel to Evil Dead Rise to make this. I'm not sure if you've seen Evil Dead Rise, but based on what you've seen, do you think he made the right call going for a film like this?
I mean, quite possibly. I think it's really, I came into this film less of a Croninite and more of a mummy fire. Mm-hmm. I think we look at the history of the mummy. We go back to the Boris Karloff version in the 1930s, and you look at the much beloved Brendan Fraser version in the 2000s, and then the significantly less beloved reboot version from the Dark Universe. And I remember Brendan Fraser was asked why he thought that 2017 version flopped, and he said that he thought that the film wasn't fun enough, and a mummy film should be a thrill ride. And I think when you look at this film, I'm not necessarily sure whether it is a thrill. It's certainly no Brendan Fraser mummy. It's certainly very visceral, and it definitely captures Cronin's style of the current landscape of horror. And I think that's what's really interesting, because The Mummy seems to be, through all these different versions, is trying to capture what horror means in that particular landscape.
Yeah.
And it is really curious that this film is presented as Lee Cronin's The Mummy, because I don't think Lee Cronin has the cultural cachet to be Lee Cronin's The Mummy. I think this is far more of a Blumhouse's The Mummy. So
it was Jason Blum's idea to put Lee Cronin in front of the title.
Yeah. Well, I wonder whether that's very much a case of trying to separate this from the previous iterations of The Mummy. And I'm sure Lorcan, who I mentioned is more of a gorehound than me, will be able to speak more of Cronin's influence on this. For me, I think this film is far more influenced by the general sense. Like, this film reminded me an awful lot of The Conjuring, and a lot of these folk horror films are far more domestic in tone rather than these broader scares. This film is relying an awful lot on tone and atmosphere rather than what cynics might call cheap techniques such as jump scares or gore. I mean, there is a fair amount of gore, but I think this film exceeds because of its technical proficiency.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to bring you in here just based on some of what Luke was saying, because I think I texted you, didn't I, being like, how scary is the mummy? And you said it's kind of disgusting, there's quite a lot of gore, not so many jump scares. I mean, in terms of Cronin and what he does here, does he bring anything new to this kind of genre for you?
No, nothing particularly new. He definitely has a vibe. I thought a lot about a really terrible horror writer called Jack Ketchum, and there was like a period in the mid-2000s where they were throwing Jack Ketchum's name on top of adaptations of his books, and his books are all very mean-spirited, nice people facing horrible circumstances, and this does fall into the realm of that. But I think he's got enough of a style. I don't mind that he put his name on it. I think that's kind of charming, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I think it's interesting continuing to make a mummy movie, because I think the idea now is that it's quite a colonial idea that an adventuring go-getter goes to the Middle East and exposes some horrible evil monster that's been buried by some ancient peoples. So I think they've moved away from that quite a bit. So good luck, Brendan Fraser's Mummy 4. And so this isn't the Mummy. It is 100% The Exorcist with a bit of Egyptian gloss on it. I think it's where the film might turn people off. I think I found it very enjoyably over the top, really mean-spirited and horrible, and it was just generally icky. I think what will probably put a lot of people off is the film goes out of its way to have a real-life parallel between what if your child was abducted into what was effectively trafficking ring, and you got them back and they were unrecognizable, and the film apes on that, which I can 100% see people being off-put by that parallel. But generally, taking that aside, I thought it was a fun ride for 2 hours and 10 minutes, a horror film. I thought it carried it well. I think the main issue I had was Jack Rayner just seemed out of place, and he seemed way too young to be a dad of like several teenage kids as well.
I just want to pick up, I think, there's definitely this film on a very obvious first level signifying basis is the parallel between her being abducted rather than, in this case, put in a tomb for 8 years. But I think for me it also speaks more broadly to what happens when your child very clearly is unwell and the parents are unwilling to acknowledge that. I think this film plays off this in some really interesting ways, where they bring I've heard criticisms of this film that it's unrealistic, that this kid who's like got pus pouring out of them and that's going to lock the child in the room, and the doctors have said all this girl needs is a bit of love from her family. I think there's a real delicious irony to any child who's struggling and their parents who don't know what to do with them. They just hide it away and pretend it doesn't happen and hope that it will get better. And there are several moments in this film where it's like something really horrific happens in the house. The child is doing things that you're thinking, why are you not seeking professional help? And then it will cut in the middle of a sequence, and the parents are just at home chatting and just pretending like everything's normal. I think it's important to recognise what this film is doing on an allegorical level beyond just the most obvious layer here. I think there's a lot more to say about the way that we treat our children. I don't think that always works. I think the film does need to be able to make logical, consistent sense with the character decisions, particularly as it then abandons that technique in the final third of the film and becomes a far more of a standard thrill ride that is cutting, intertwining. I don't know what's happening. I've lost complete sense of who's possessed, who's doing what.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you bring that up just before we wrap up, because Cronin has said, it's interesting, you're talking about the brutality and the kind of relentlessness of that, and you're talking about, well, there's a little bit behind the daughter being very unwell, and Cronin actually said that creating this film was a way of processing his grief for when he lost his mother. So do you think that the emotional weight of that does actually come through here?
I think, I think it's kind of ironic that this film's called The Mummy, and at the heart of this film is an awful lot of interactions between mothers and their child, and it's hard not to think that's a joke. And I don't know whether that's deliberate or not, whether he's chosen The Mummy to cope with the loss of his mum. That feels weird. It feels unintentional. And there's as Lorcan says, it's not really he's made up a fictional Egyptian god, so it may as well not be the mummy at all. Like there's very little people with bandages, gormlessly roaming around.
There is a fun twist, in terms of the effects. I think there's a lot of sincere effort here, and they do a really, really disgusting fun twist with the kind of wrappings as well. But I think the script itself, I thought, was actually surprisingly quite intelligent. Like there's a moment early on where the husband and wife can't decide whether or not to give their daughter ice cream, and it sets up that there's occasions where they disagree on how to raise their kids, and then that comes back in a much bigger way. So there are very clever sprinklings of good setups that then have really significant payoffs. So I was quite impressed by the script itself for what this is.
Okay, great. So thank you very much. That is Lee Cronin's The Mummy, and it is Certificate 18. It is showing at the Light. Moving on now, we're going to talk about Rebuilding.
Kelly Rose, your dad's going to take you for a bit.
Want to see the ranch?
Ranch ain't there no more.
I want to see it.
I'm gonna be staying somewhere else, just for the time being. That's not a real home. What am I doing here?
You really need me to tell you that?
Rebuilding is written and directed by Max Walker-Silverman, who is behind the film A Love Song, and it stars Josh O'Connor, who we have seen quite a lot of recently, as Dusty, a divorced Colorado rancher whose land has been destroyed in a wildfire, leaving him in a FEMA trailer park surrounded by neighbours who have lost everything too. It is here that he slowly starts to find community again and begins to rebuild, hence the title, his relationship with his young daughter and ex-wife. Nick, so Rebuilding, how did this one land for you? Did it draw you in?
Well, it's a tight 90-minute movie where it's not a action-packed thrill ride. It's a gentle whisper of a movie, and films like this I find can tread a thin line between being mawkish and uplifting and hopeful. But fortunately, this falls very much into the latter. There were moments where I thought it was getting a little bit mawkish. Josh O'Connor, as we have discussed many times on this show, is, I think he's a remarkable actor.
He is, yeah.
But I'm having a bit too much of him at the minute, and I was getting a little frustrated. I just wish he would smile once in a while, just once. And he has his hunched shoulders. He's lost everything, and the title of the movie speaks for itself. He finds in subtle, small ways things in his life that he can start to rebuild, and he starts to recognise the important things in his life. Much of it is unspoken, in terms of it doesn't show. It's not a show and tell movie. It's for you to understand and recognise what's going on. He meets a bunch of characters who've also lost everything, and through them and his daughter and his family, he starts to see what's important in life and what matters. And that translates to everybody, and anybody who's been through a difficult time in their life and they need to find a path through it, which for me at the moment felt very, 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 very relevant. It's laden with pathos, and I was surprisingly charmed by it. And it's got a wonderful soundtrack and a great and the second film, which I will come to later on, which features Lucky Man's John Prine. John Prine's Lucky Man.
Excellent. Emma, I've seen a couple of reviews comparing this to something a bit like Nomadland, and I'm wondering, as someone who didn't quite take to Nomadland, but I know I'm in the minority.
No, you're not. You're sitting next to Nomadland's biggest critic, Lorcan O'Neill.
I'm wondering, is that a fair comparison, or are they just looking at a sort of quiet American indie?
It's much less furious. It's much less sort of in-your-face political, which maybe did or didn't work for Nomadland, or as some people may have called it around this table, poverty porn, I think was maybe a bit. It's much slighter than Nomadland. It is quietly political. I thoroughly agree with everything Nick said. To be fair to Josh O'Connor, this actually did come out in Sunday. This came out at the beginning of 2025, so he did this straight off the back of Challengers. It's just taken a long time to come to us.
And it's one of his best performances in a while.
I loved his physicality in this. He's in his trailer. You don't kind of realise how tall Josh O'Connor is, but you put a cowboy hat on him, some cowboy boots, and he's always kind of slumped over. Also, stunning backup work from Carly Reese, best known for True Detective season 4 as another as sort of compatriot on the trailer park. Megan Fahey, White Lotus season 2 as his ex-wife, and then this really great young Australian actress I'd never heard of, Lily Latour, playing his daughter, because Callie Rose has quite a large part in it. Sometimes these, as I like to say, these films can live or die depending on what the Moppets are like, and she was very believable. It is, as Nick said, believable. It's almost as gentle as Tumbleweed falling down. It was. It appealed to me because I was like 90 minutes. That sounds like a. And it was just gorgeous. The cinematography is beautiful. It's not changing. It's not changing. It's not breaking the wheel. It's not reinventing the wheel. That's what he says, isn't it? But it does it. It does what it's trying to say, which is just a quiet film about, reality about climate change, because at the end they do say, well, we've got maybe 10 years before this will all happen again. Also in terms of other people, Amy Madigan, fresh off her Oscar win, or not, she plays the mother-in-law, and there are some really, really touching scenes around her, and I like the fact that the divorced wife's new partner is also very taciturn, but he's absolutely, there's no suggesting they're going to get back together. There's none of that. It's a really lovely, gentle film.
And I would just add one thing, because I was worried this was going to turn into a sort of nomad land, and that worried me. But it does exactly the opposite. It does actually touch on quite a few political issues, but like you say, very with a mellifluous tone. It sort of, there's the environment in there. There's relationships with very believable characters. So
a surprising delight.
Yes, agreed.
Surprising, quietly lovely delight. Very nice. Okay, thank you very much. That is. Rebuilding. It is a certificate PG, and it is currently showing at the Arts Picture House. Emma, over to you.
Let's take a look at our first streamer then, just before the ads. Here is a trailer for Outcome.
Reef Hawk, for the last 4 decades, America's favorite movie star, starring in 3 of the biggest franchises in film history. You've had 5 years off. How are you going to frame the 5 years thing?
I won't say that I was hiding a heroin addiction from the public, and that my best friends and my insane lawyer helped me cover it up for years.
That is a really smart omission.
Strong omission.
Today I walk down the street I used to wander.
In this Hollywood satire, Keanu Reeves stars as Reef Hawk, a sort of fictionalised version of himself, an A-list actor who is, according to the entire industry, one of the nicest people ever to have acted. Until a blackmailer threatens him with video evidence of behaviour that could get him cancelled. What is on the video is anyone's guess. So Reef has to turn to his venal lawyer, Ira, Jonah Hill, starring and directing, and his 2 best friends, Matt Bomer and Cameron Diaz from high school, to work out who might be behind this extortion, and in the meantime apologise to anyone he might have hurt along the way. Yossi, back to you first on this one. I really struggle with Jonah Hill, I'm not going to lie. But anyway, he made Mid-90s, which is a pretty sort of bleak picture of skater culture in, believe it or not, the mid-90s. He's taken some time off before he's come back with another directorial film. This was sort of heralded as a return to the big screen for Cameron Diaz. There are loads of cameos in it. Drew Barrymore plays herself. Martin Scorsese plays a sort of washed-up talent agent. I don't know if these are all pals. I guess they're pals with Jonah Hill. Somebody worked with Martin Scorsese. Did it work for you?
I'm so sorry, it did not work.
Don't be sorry. Don't be sorry.
At all. I really wanted to give this some appreciation, but it's quite difficult for me. Mid-90s is a better film. I actually quite liked Mid-90s, and this just doesn't feel the same. The tone for me was kind of all over the place. Couldn't really work out if it was supposed to be a dark comedy, if it was kind of a satire or a serious drama. I couldn't work it out, and it felt really off for me. There's some commentary on cancel culture, and it just doesn't really commit to that. I just found it kind of boring. I couldn't really engage with it, so for me, it didn't really land.
No, I'm with you, because in Jonah Hill's office, they have like these massive pictures of Kevin Spacey and Kanye West and all these really famous cancers they walk past, but they never really do anything with that joke or carry it forward. Again, it's only 90 minutes long. I watched this, Nick, and I kept thinking about The Studio, Seth Rogen's recent kind of 10-part TV series, and I just thought, is this trying to do that, but The Studio did it better and sharper, or is it doing something different? I mean, can you find anything? I'm with Yossi. I did not like this.
I think this might surprise you what I'm about to say, Emma, but this is basically the same plot as Rebuilding. in my mind. It was, no, bear with me.
I will talk about this in the pub afterwards because I am not sure I agree. But no, please give me your reasons.
One is done well and one is not done well. This is basically about... so rebuilding is about a cowboy who's lost everything. And then he's trying to find his... and he's got nothing, and he's finding his way back through the traumas of his life. Here we've got a washed-up multi-millionaire actor in Keanu Reeves.
He's very keenly, though, not washed up. He never becomes washed up. There is just this fear that he could be. But you never know what it is. So
No, and
just want to make that clear, Nick.
Well, no, and I think that's the problem with the movie, is that nothing is particularly clear, and it never gets under the skin of anything in the way that you say about cancel culture. It touches upon it and then sort of goes away and hides in a cupboard and doesn't want to address it. The film even ends up, Lucky Man, they still use the same song, the John Prine song, at the end, and so Keanu Reeves' character is sort of goes through this therapy session where everyone picks him apart one by one, and he sort of goes down, a bit like Josh O'Connor's character, down to the bottom to then find himself, and then go, actually, these are the things that are important to me in life. And then it ends with him ringing up Martin Scorsese and having a chat. But it doesn't work because it doesn't get under the skin of anything in a way that rebuilding does precisely.
It's almost like a 12-step program, right? It's almost like it's got to go back to like you would do in your 12 steps to go back and apologise to everybody. And I couldn't understand why Matt Bomer as Xander and Cameron Diaz as Kyle, his two alleged best friends since high school, who saw him through his 5 years of heroin addiction, are there for the ride. They had these really weird CGI shots of them sitting on his balcony with a kind of fake backdrop of Malibu, just sort of talking. It just was really odd.
Yeah, but I mean, I did find some of the dialogue snappy at times and quite sort of witty. I don't think I hated it as much as yours and yourself, Emma, but I didn't like it very much.
I don't think I can hate it because it doesn't really stir that much emotion in me for it to hate.
Let me ask them both of you very quickly how you feel about me. I do actively hate Jonah Hill when he's on the screen now. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry, Jonah Hill, if you listen to this, but I just find his screen presence so grating. And again, this just seems to be veneers. He put veneers in just like he did in The Wolf of Wall Street. He has massive fake teeth. He's obviously now he's in a super skinny Jonah Hill phase, and he just says "bubby" all the time to show that he is, a kind of a Hollywood lawyer. And I just couldn't with it. I'm sorry, but I don't know. But so I really obviously did hate it. But you two are you're being much kinder.
Well, no, I don't think yours has any time for it at all. I wasn't bored by it, and I thought it was nice to see Scorsese turn up and do something.
It was lovely to see Scorsese.
I was warned by the conversation at the end, and Keanu Reeves is a delight, right?
Yeah, but Keanu, I think, was a great casting choice for that role. But I have to agree, it doesn't. At the end of it, you think, well, what did that get under the skin of anything? Nothing at all. And in a way that I walked out of Rebuilding thinking, that feels like a genuine movie about someone who's finding his path way back through difficult circumstances. Here, I mean, what were we supposed to feel for Keanu's character? He couldn't care less, really.
I absolutely agree with Yossi in that Midnight is a much, much more
it is a much
movie.
better
movie. Yeah. And I'm sorry, Nick, but we will carry on this conversation later. The rebuild, I'm really unsure about the rebuilding comparison. I think that's undermining rebuilding, which we just raised
I think it strengthens the case.
Anyway, Outcome is a certificate 15, and if you really want to spend an hour and a half watching that, I mean, you might be a huge Cameron Diaz fan, it is streaming on Apple TV.
Cambridge Radio.
Cambridge Radio podcasts tell the story of our city and the people who live here. Hear the stories of women making a difference in women making waves.
That has brought me to working with women, knowing that you can recover from things and that art can give you huge strength.
Download the latest in tech with Gadget Guide.
Cambridge, the home to the Raspberry Pi Foundation and the Raspberry Pi Little Computer, means, of course, Cambridge has a community forum. That's the Cambridge Raspberry Jam.
Debate the issues that matter to you with CAMS Politics.
If the elections do take place in 2027, new councils will take over a year later in 2028.
Listen to your favourite Cambridge podcast on Radio Player or wherever you get your podcasts.
Tired of accountants who just talk in jargon? Meet GMS Accountants, built for small business owners who want a local accountant they can actually talk to. No call centres, no being passed around. One dedicated point of contact. an accountant who speaks your language and on your side. Visit gms-accountants.co.uk. GMS Accountants. Just what you need.
Cambridge Radio.
Cambridge Film Show.
This is Cambridge Radio.
You are listening to Cambridge Radio, and this is the Cambridge Film Show. We do have a couple of films left to talk about, but let's kick off with Balls Up.
This is my product. I was working out the kinks.
Oh, it had some kink.
I should be the one showcasing it.
There is no better designer than you, Elijah, but there's no better salesman than Brad.
Introducing the Balls Up.
Why hasn't anyone thought of this before? The official condom of Brazil 2025 is... the Balls Up. You two are so good together. You don't see it. Oh, nope. But I do. I'm gonna make sure you're there at the World Cup final.
Balls Up is directed by Peter Farrelly, the man behind Dumb and Dumber, There's Something About Mary, and also Green Book, and written by the Deadpool duo Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick. Mark Wahlberg and Paul Walter Hauser play rival marketing executives who pitch a full coverage condom called the it was called the Testicle Sentinel, but then they changed the name as the official prophylactic of the World Cup. Things go a little bit wrong, and the two find themselves fleeing Brazil while the entire country tries to kill them. That is actually the plot of the film. Luke, I'll come to you first. I mean, from that summary, it does sound a bit ridiculous. Is it ridiculous enough?
This film was an insult to all of my senses. I think it begins with a premise which makes no sense, which is apparently that prophylactics sell most during World Cups, which just is utterly unbelievable to me. And then the concept that they designed for this prophylactic seems to bear no real benefit. And I'm wondering why, did they come up with the title Balls Up and thought, men have balls and football has balls, there's got to be something in that. Let's phone up Mark Wahlberg, the least funny man in Hollywood, to carry this film for 90 minutes. I've also got some slack that... So the most generous reading you could get of this film is that it's an advert for the upcoming World Cup and to get people interested in football, because by the end of the film, Paul Walter Hauser and Mark Wahlberg, after going on this epic adventure, realise that football is a wonderful sport for all the people. And you think, brilliant, that's fine, but none of the football in this film is logical or sensical. The fact that this is set in... They very explicitly say this film is the 2025 World Cup in Brazil. And anyone who knows anything about football knows that the World Cup is this year, and it's quite famously in the USA. And you might say that's nitpicking, but I think when nothing...
Never hurt Ted Lasso.
When nothing else in the film has made sense, and supposedly your lesson here is about getting people on side, that I can do a football pun too, for football... then at least get the basic facts right for the people who are even moderately interested in football, because otherwise the lesson that we're drawing about how we've learned how wonderful football is, but we're not going to care one iota about having anything here make sense. And I would suggest that they've purely made this film so they can make a series of quite degrading jokes about Brazilians and drug culture.
Well, there is an issue there, and it's interesting that you talk about that, because this was marketed as a film about football. We are in a World Cup year. Yes, they've got those details wrong, but even so, we're in a World Cup year. And it's marketed as something to do with football. There's actually not very much football in this film at all. I expected more. What happens is you start off with the football tournament, and then you go on to this kind of, they've made a mistake and everyone's out to get them and they're racing through Brazil. So what is this film trying to do, Lorcan?
Well, it is effectively just an ad for the World Cup in a kind of similar way that the Eurovision film Song of Ice and Fire is like an ad for the Eurovision.
It's no Song of Ice and Fire, though.
We cannot compare the two.
It's an hour shorter, so...
That's true.
I think, for me, there was way too much, as established on the previous episode of this show, I'm not into football, and there is an ungodly series of 20 minutes of watching Brazil play and it's just elongated sequence of them playing, and then it cuts to Paul Walter Hauser and Mark Wahlberg on a green screen going, yay, boo. And it goes...
Even if you are a football fan, that football doesn't do anything for you.
Meanwhile, everyone in the stands is facing and looking in different directions.
Well, it is a terrible sequence, and I after quite a funny opening, I lost interest completely during that sequence because I thought it was so bizarre. But then it kind of gets on track. It's just a road trip boner comedy. Like I really giggled quite a lot. Like Peter Farrelly's previous Amazon release, Ricky Stenicki, I didn't even feel bad about laughing. I thought it was genuinely quite funny. It's written by the Ryan Reynolds regulars that write all of his shtick. But for this, I thought it was genuinely kind of crude in a quite fun and creative way.
Okay, I did not giggle very much.
Oh, I giggled quite a lot.
Oh, okay. Well, Emma, let's come to you next.
I'll be very
just
quick.
looking at the supporting cast, we've got Sacha Baron Cohen, Benjamin Bratt, Eric Andre. There's quite a lot of talent, actually, comedic talent. Do they have enough to do?
I enjoyed Eric Andre's bit, where he's like the leader of this sort of awful American hippie cult who've gone into the rainforest, but they've really only gone there because they both fancy this sort of pioneering anti-poacher woman who's now just making them murder any poachers they found, and they haven't even had to have sex with her yet, and they're really disappointed by that. That really made me laugh. I thought Sacha Baron Cohen, he's not in it for very long, but again, he just sort of convolutes his mouth. That made me chuckle. I chuckled at the scene when there was some kind of fish that go up people's penises. That made me laugh too. I can't lie. I do not find Mark Wahlberg the least funny man in Hollywood, and I enjoy him when he plays this straight man. And I think Paul Walter Hauser is such a sincerely joyful screen presence. Because I think Paul Walter Hauser seems like someone who's so grateful to be having the career he's having, and always gives 100%. So I was a bit with Lorcan. I may have even dozed off because I was quite drunk. I may have even dozed off during that football bit, but I did come back into this, and that was a pretty fun prime comedy.
Mixed reviews then, Nick.
So I'm going to wind people up further, I think, of my outcome and rebuilding comparisons by saying I think this is Peter Farrelly's take on the Odyssey, and essentially it's replete with
I'm more with that.
with exile from a kingdom because they've ostracised themselves through an event via the medium of football. There are corrupt kings with the drug barons. There's even a forest siren in the form of a deranged eco-warrior. And then they have to find their way home by crossing the border into a foreign land, Argentina in this case, who welcome them with opening arms, of course, because they're not in Brazil. They are the winners of the World Cup. In this fantasy land, you see, because it's set in 2025, because it's in an alternative universe. So I actually think this is Farrelly's take on the Odyssey. Sorry.
No, I mean, I would say that, there is precedent to that. You look at Harold and Kumar Goes to White Castle, very like a stoner comedy that is very explicitly a version of the Odyssey, and you look as well at the Coen brothers' Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
That really is.
And I do wonder whether we just fall into this trap of thinking people going on a mad, wacky adventure while making crude gags, because we're going to make it vaguely Odysseic.
I had to make something of this movie, otherwise I'd have probably lost the will.
I clearly did lose the will.
I feel like we have some diversity of opinion here, so I think our listeners are going to have to make their own minds up. If you would like to check out Balls Up, it is a certificate 15, and you can watch it from the comfort of your sofa on Amazon Prime.
Okay, it's back to Netflix, and it is the Sandler dynasty again in Roommates.
The hardest problem first-year students face isn't moving away from home.
This is for emergencies. Booze is not an emergency. Neither are edibles.
Or balancing our work and social lives.
Hey, baby, no, I don't know how many guys are going to be there.
It's trying to coexist with your roommates.
Spin the bottle. Cousin edition.
This is my roommate, Celeste. And this is me. If I seem traumatized, it's because I am.
Why'd you stop? Keep singing!
I was wondering what the process is for switching roommates.
This coming-of-age romp stars Sadie Sandler, who's the eldest of Adam's two daughters, as Devon, who is earnest and likeable but has not had the most positive or popular high school experience and is hoping desperately to change that as she heads off to college. Enter Chloe East's Celeste, who during orienteering takes Devon under her super cool, sexy and confident wing. As they become roommates, though, is Celeste everything she pretends to be, and is this really going to be a good move for Devon? Luke, I'll come to you first. I I kind of was watching this and I thought maybe you could sort of think of it as like Booksmart meets Mean Girls, sort of. Who is this aimed at? Who do you think the audience is for this?
Me, for one, I guess. I got on board with this film pretty well. I was very sceptical that this was when Adam Sandler's production company appeared right at the start of this film, and it was starring Sadie Sandler, and I thought, uh-oh. But she really won me around, and this film really works on the fact that Sandler she may be a quote-unquote Nepo baby, and more on that later as well, I think, once we dig into the film. But she really does earn her place here, and much of the film is with her alongside Chloe East, who I wasn't familiar with. I think they absolutely have brilliant chemistry throughout this film, and they're supported by some much more well-known sporting players. Natasha Lyonne is always fun. The real standout for me is Sarah Sherman, who people will probably know best from Saturday Night Live, and her stand-up, as well as playing almost the exact same character in the previous Adam Sandler Netflix film, You Were So Not Invited to My Bar Mitzvah, where she also played a high school counsellor.
Bat mitzvah.
Oh, yeah, yes, because it's a
daughter,
yeah. And I think Sarah Sherman is just a superb comedic talent. We're going through a real dearth of SNL alumni into film roles, and Sherman's comedies outside of films is known as being really wacky and difficult and controversial, and she's managed to do something on film that's so utterly charming.
Yeah, yours. They do set this within its structure. Basically, you start off with you start off with two other girls having an argument, and then Sarah Silverman, as a counsellor, drags them in and tells them this sort of warning story about two previous roommates, and so they're sort of sitting there in the office going, oh no, what happens, getting invested, a little bit like, say, a Princess Bride premise, if you will. I'm with Luke. I thought that Sadie Sandler was just great in this. I felt, though, that I got slightly irritated because obviously her parents, played by Natasha Lyonne and Nick Kroll, both really good Netflix alumni or Netflix, MVPs, were so understanding and so nice, and you're leading up to some kind of redemption, but it took me a little bit too long to get there, and I was a little bit, but it's female centric, it's really funny. What did you think of it?
I really liked it. I thought it was good fun. Sarah Sherman, again, I agree, really brilliant. Sadie Sandler, really good. And it was something that I kind of could just sat and engaged with. I found it quite fun. I think there are parts where I'm like, these girls are really mean-spirited to each other. Like, this wouldn't happen, surely. And I think I was live texting you, wasn't I, Emma, as I was watching it, to be like, oh, there's going to be some kind of trauma-fueled redemption arc here. That doesn't quite happen. But for me, it didn't really matter. And we don't always need trauma-fueled redemptions, do we? So it was something that I would recommend as just a nice popcorn watch.
And do we think that sort of 20-year-old... I can imagine this speaking to like teenage girls.
Yeah, I think for the most part, yes. I think to go back to your original question, obviously this film's main target audience isn't 34-year-old men. It is mostly young women in their 20s, and for the most part that works, and you see a version of college life that feels at least a sense of cinematic real. That's real with both EAL and EEL.
Got it.
One thing that I think may be worthy of criticism is that the premise here is that Sadie Sandler's Devon has never had any friends, and she's nervous about going off to school and making friends. And there's this really lovely sequence where she talks to her parents about how nervous she is to going off to university. And I think that's a really, really relatable moment that I think a lot of people will have. And it doesn't necessarily pay off that well, because like on her first day, she meets Chloe East, and she seems to function as a perfectly fine... a young
Chloe
college
East
student.
comes across as a psychopath from the very beginning. I think a sociopath from the very beginning, which I struggle, particularly when she has such good parents as Nick Kroll.
But I did like the draw between the two main. I thought that was quite relatable. How Sadie Sandler and Chloe East became friends. That moment where they meet and they kind of latch onto each other is actually really relatable.
Yeah, I would say that I think if you're going in thinking this is going to be a film about the struggles of making friendship and awkward, like Booksmart, you see two very awkward people who get on together. They seem to get magnetic chemistry, and they don't feel particularly awkward.
But I do think it's relatable. I do think it's real. And what I really did like is that Adam Sandler did not cast himself and his wife as Sadie Sandler's parents.
Yes,
I think that was a really smart move because I did expect them to pop up as the parents. I must admit.
I think that's quite important given the third act plot twist, which I'm loath
it's a bit nuts, that third act.
to give it away.
It is nuts.
In a film that sort of addresses the idea of nepotism, for the victim of this to be Sadie Sandler, who's starring in this film as a Nepo baby, feels a little bit like a slap in the face.
So I would not look that deeply into this. I just greatly enjoyed her as a leading lady, I think.
Yes.
So, look, that sounds again like a pretty roundabout, I'd say some pretty positive reviews there. That is Roommates. It's streaming on Netflix and it's a certificate 12A. Maybe a 15, actually. 15. Let's go 15.
We'll go with that. Okay. Our last film is Exit 8, and we don't have a trailer for this one because it's in Japanese. So, Exit 8 is a Japanese psychological horror film directed by Genki Kawamura and adapted from the indie video game of the same name. Essentially, a man is trapped in an endlessly looping Tokyo subway corridor and he must find his way to Exit 8. The rules are kind of simple. If you spot an anomaly, you turn back. If things look normal, you keep going. If you miss something, you go back to the start. And what starts as kind of this seemingly simple gameplay becomes something altogether more unsettling. Now, I've not heard of the game, so I'm not very familiar with this, but apparently, and one of you can correct me if I'm wrong, Luke Lorcan, the gameplay doesn't really have much story. So does Kawamura pull off bringing something like this into a 95-minute runtime? Lorcan?
Absolutely. I think the Japanese are quite good as a film industry of making concepts like this quite worthy, whereas in America they'll tend to be like a Minecraft, which is just kind of mindless nonsense. They don't feel like they have to justify the reason to make it into a film, whereas the Japanese cinema tends to be like, well, we're going to adapt this video game that doesn't really have a plot, but let's try to give it a plot. Let's try to create reasons why we should care about these characters. And I think they actually do a really good job. It's liminal horror is the new big thing in horror, and AI slop, and there's a new film coming out with I think Chiwetel Ejiofor, Backrooms, which really delves into this liminal horror. So liminal horror is being stuck in a space that kind of feels never ending and no one ever looks into it or cares about it, and you're just kind of lost forever. And the game is literally just you go through a corridor. If you go through the corridor 8 times successfully, then you've won the game. But I did end up caring quite a lot about the characters. They give it this episodic feel, which really helps the flow. It's not just about the main character. There are other characters and complications and some nice plot twists. And it's just the clever thing about the game is that it makes you paranoid. Every time you walk through the corridor, you're constantly looking for little details, which works perfectly for a horror film, I think.
Broadly speaking, I did like this film, and I agree with Lorcan for the most part. I think this, as a film, this has to do a lot of work, as you've sort of alluded to work as opposed to the game. And I think that will frustrate some people. For Lorcan, it seemed to work. I think one of the real joys of the game is that you go into it completely blind, not knowing the rules. And the real appeal of it is getting sucked into this paranoia of these often very small differences. Like there might be a word slightly different or a light might be a different colour. Whereas the film can't put you in that position. You can't be the person observing it. You're watching the watcher. Mm-hmm. And it often means that the things that are different about the room often end up being quite overt. Like there's a big flood in one aspect, or the things tend to be a lot more noticeable to generate a sense of horror. And I think it's hard to adapt that into a film. And to make up for that, they try and bring more character into it. So we have 3 intercutting versions of people playing this game at various stages. And I think that's necessary for this to work as a film, and we get this broader narrative arc about the space being about someone trying to get through a psychological block of whether they're ready to move on to the next stage of their life, which I think, there is a quote worthiness to that in some respects, but I think it undermines perhaps the purity of the gameplay to introduce character. And often I think when we cut away to a new person and their experience, we lose the first person perspective.
It's interesting you say that, because I think there is a bit of a balance when you do these video game adaptations of being quite loyal to the game but also bringing in an element of story. And from my I've not seen this, but from my research, the main protagonist, it seems like the kind of looping corridors are a sort of metaphor for him avoiding his own sense of fatherhood or commitment. Does that at least come through strongly enough?
I think so. Like I said, there's a really nice resonating theme of how we as people are becoming more disillusioned, and the main dramatic thrust for the main character is, should he have intervened at this person who was screaming at their kid on the train? And he feels bad that he didn't. But it's like kind of modern day, that's becoming more used to what people are more familiar with that kind of scenario, and people not intervening and helping each other and having each other's back, particularly on the subway, which I thought was a very clever way to include the subway element. I disagree with Luke a little bit. I think there are some instances where there are small details where it's obvious to the audience that there's something has changed, but he's so in his own world that he doesn't notice, and so that adds this kind of excitement and tension for us as well, I think.
Yeah, and just to add, because in terms of the kind of cinematography here, do you get that sense of the kind of claustrophobicness of this wandering around trying to find your exit? And that is quite faithful to the gameplay.
I think this is what was really remarkable about this film, is that it is one corridor, it's one sort of L-shaped corridor for the entire film. And I was very concerned that was not going to work for a 90-minute film, because beyond the opening and closing sequence, it is just a single corridor, and it's really cinematic. I'm seeing the clips here play on my screen of this fully white screen, white tiles, white space. As Lorcan mentioned, there's this whole movement towards liminal cinema, and this is I'm concerned about Backrooms coming up. I think that perhaps Exit 8 is the one that people should go and watch as an exemplifier of this genre.
Okay, well, I think I'm getting a positive sense. I feel like that's something that we might suggest to especially if you're into that kind of that horror film, that might be one for you. So that is Exit 8, and I believe it is currently showing at the Light Cinema, so you can go and check that out at the Light. Well, that is actually all we've got time for. It has been such fun. But if you are looking for more film-based chat, you can check out our podcasts, which are available on whatever you listen to your podcasts on. Or you can just wait and join us in a couple of weeks on the 9th of May, when we will be discussing films like the notable big release The Devil Wears Prada. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.